Hey guys, tonight we will step into the silent halls of the Tudor court to tell the tragic fate of a royal girl born with congenital deformities, a princess who should have been welcomed with glory, but was instead cast aside, subjected to a series of merciless medical examinations and indifferent, contemptuous status, from her trembling steps across the grand hall to the long, solitary nights spent in the lonely garden of white orchids. She steadfastly transformed her loneliness into inner strength, ultimately finding simple peace in a thatched cottage and a pristine row of white flowers. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there now? Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step slowly through the massive stone gate, each cold expanse of wall seeming to exhale a misty breath. The Tudor hall unfolds before you. A space at once magnificent and eerily deserted. Candlelight dances on the rough stone. Its warm glow, a reminder of centuries of solitude, the steady clink of swords and spears as the guards shift. Watch blends with the soft sigh of tapestries underfoot, as though whispering untold tales. A heady perfume of noble women's scents drifts through narrow doorways, mingling with the earthy smell of damp straw and soil beneath your feet, creating a unique symphony of aromas that both awakens and lulls the mind. Before the vast stone dais, your gaze is drawn to Henry VIII, a commanding figure clad in sumptuous silken velvet, a jeweled sword at his hip, and a solid gold scepter in hand. He stands at the center like a beacon of authority. Each gesture, each glance, stirs the souls of hundreds. Around him, ladies in waiting, and courtiers don layer upon layer of exquisite garments, silk, velvet, and embroidered thread in blazing red, deep green, and gleaming gold. They form rigid ranks, silent as statues, so still that you can hear your own heartbeat echo. Everyone waits, holding their breath for a command, a glance to confer favor, or a silent judgment. Amid this solemn splendor, you suddenly sense an unusual chill, as if a hidden breath has slipped past the guards. Tension rises, and the hall falls completely silent. Only curious eyes spin from one corner to the next. A soft whisper drifts from the shadows, spreading through the assembly. Something strange is about to happen. Faces flush with a mix of fear and anticipation. They speak not of politics or power plays, but of the strange occurrence that is about to unfold. At the threshold appears a young woman, her posture uncertain, her dress shabby, as though she has stepped out of some harsh dream. A coarse grey cloak hangs loosely from her slender frame. Unhemmed and trailing toward her feet, she bows her head, eyes fixed on the floor, each step heavy, as if she bears the weight of the world. Candlelight reveals the fatigue etched on her face. With each hesitant footfall across the grand hall, it is as though she presses a cold pebble into the audience's collective heart. A wave of anticipation swells, then twists into disgust, then softens to pity. Fans flutter in rushed motions. Ladies in waiting awkwardly cover their mouths, and tension knits their brows, as though a silent chorus of hatred has struck up. You feel her isolation. She is no longer a member of the court, but a curious anomaly amid the splendor. The contempt is openly displayed, unhidden, a tacit ritual carving pain into the very air. This is no mere performance. The polite smiles and formal curtsies conceal a quiet tragedy. She is not the protagonist of courtly intrigues, nor is she a petitioner seeking mercy. She has become the subject of a ruthless psychological game, where every eye scrutinizes, arranges, analyzes, and decrees that she is an ill omen. You stand there, heart pounding, wondering how long this cruelty will last, and whether she will ever find an escape. or simply fade into the shadows of the court's deceptive brilliance. The moment the so-called oddity stepped into the hall, an uncanny hush rippled through the assembled crowd. A lady in waiting beside you trembled, her fan fluttering with increasing urgency, her lips pressed into a thin line of apprehension. The gathered nobles bowed their heads in respectful silence. Yet their eyes betrayed a blend of fear, morbid curiosity, and barely concealed contempt. Soft whispers wound their way around the room, surely an ill omen. What on earth is that figure doing here? They say she shrieks like a demon each night. She offered a deep, trembling curtsy, her gaze fixed on the polished stone floor rather than the glittering faces around her. Her garments hung in tatters, coarse wool dyed a dank grey, seams crudely stitched and pulling loose at the hems. With one shaky hand she clutched at the folds of her skirt, as though terrified someone might tear away even that humble covering. Each step she took was an ordeal, her shoulders slumped, weighed down by invisible boulders. A discreet murmur arose among the courtiers standing nearest, commenting in hushed tones on the supreme importance of appearance in this gilded realm. A single stain, a crooked bow, a misplaced word could shatter a reputation forever. Amid this involuntary spectacle, minute details leapt forth, searing themselves into your memory. Her eyes never dared meet another's. They flicked sideways, bright with panic. Her gait was leaden and stilted, as though every joint resisted her will. Her lips appeared cracked and parched, quivering like fragile petals in a storm. A ragged intake of breath echoed softly through the vaulted chamber, carrying the sense of straw, damp earth, and her own nervous sweat. An aroma that deepened the hall's oppressive atmosphere until it felt as though the very air were too thick to inhale. You stood rooted in place, mesmerized by the tragic tableau before you, a lone girl, stripped of welcome, thrust center stage in this theater of power to serve as a grim diversion. Though no herald's trumpet had announced her presence, every soul in the room understood the unspoken performance, that she embodied a ruthless psychological display that commanded both fascination and horror. The courtiers, perched on this uneasy edge, assumed the roles of silent voyeurs, eyes wide, our hearts pounding, desperate to look away yet unable to tear themselves from the scene. As you watched, a knot of conflicting emotions formed in your chest. Sympathy twinged your heart at the sight of her trembling form, so utterly out of place amid the velvet finery and gold filigree. You wanted to extend your hand in comfort, but felt paralyzed by the unyielding etiquette of the court. A blush of shame warmed your cheeks as you realized that in this moment of shared cruelty, you were complicit simply by bearing witness. All around you, the courtiers shifted uneasily. A gentleman near the throne glanced at his fellow noble as if seeking reassurance, then hastily turned away. Servants slipped through hidden doors to refresh the torches, though none dared to offer her even a drop of water. The Queen's ladies exchanged glances heavy with unspoken judgment, their fans clicking like silent metronomes, marking time in a macabre ritual. Even the guards sworn to uphold order lowered their eyes, as though unwilling to acknowledge the girl's suffering. In the center of this curated spectacle, her poor frame trembled on the threshold of despair. You felt the weight of her isolation as keenly as your own pulse. The blazing chandeliers and ornate tapestries, symbols of stability and continuity, seemed to mock her vulnerability. Their grandeur only served to highlight her destitution. You realized that every thread of embroidery, every polished surface, every hushed footstep was complicit in her humiliation. Gradually, a restless energy began to unfurl through the hall, as though her silent distress had awakened something primal in the assembled audience. You sensed the electric tension, a mixture of eagerness and dread, tightening around your throat like a noose. You yearned to close your eyes, to break the spell that bound you to this grim tableau, yet found yourself anchored. unable to drag your gaze away. In this charged stillness, time itself seemed to stretch and yaw, leaving you suspended between outrage and pity, and so you remained, heart-hammering, mind awash with the horror of passive cruelty. You wondered how long this farce would endure, how many silent minutes she would endure before the final curtsy, the final concession to indifference. You could only hope that, somewhere beyond these hallowed walls, compassion might await her, and that her ordeal here would not remain the only chapter of her story. Outside the grand hall, deep within the private chambers, the reverberations of that girl's arrival continued to echo. Behind closed doors, whispered debates circulated among the highest nobles. In one hushed gathering, voices asked, "Should we send her away from court?" Another noble worried, "Might this become an indelible stain on the crown's reputation?" A third ventured, "If the common people catch wind, they will gossip about it for an entire year." Thus, a secret council convened in a panelled room, lit only by flickering candlelight, charting plans to conceal her in the inner palace, or dispatch her to a remote manorial estate somewhere few would ever see her again. In a quieter wing of the court, Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, sat alone. The soft rustle of her fan and the distant echo of reluctant steps guiding her attention. Through the lattice of her window, she glimpsed the slender figure of the girl, moving slowly down the corridor. There was no hint of scorn in Catherine's gentle gaze, nor the tremor of fear that gripped so many. Instead, her eyes softened with compassion. In that moment, she quietly summoned her lady-in-waiting and gave instructions to prepare a thick new blanket and a bowl of warm porridge. Though this act of kindness remained entirely unspoken, it became the first real warmth to touch the girl's frozen world. Meanwhile, in a smaller chamber down the corridor, the young Princess Mary Tudor also felt a tug at her heart. Though only a child herself, she understood the sting of isolation and disappointment. Mary crept to her own table where a small sponge cake had been left from her afternoon tea. Without fanfare, she placed it where the girl might pass and whispered a silent wish that it would bring comfort. This gesture was not meant as defiance of courtly authority, but rather as the innocent, instinctive response of one who had known sorrow. When the girl later discovered the cake, her lips curved in a faint, hesitant smile so slight and uncertain that it might have been imagined, yet to her, it felt like a small miracle. Alas, such comfort proved fleeting. Within days, a newly appointed chamberlain dismissed the old household staff. The soft blanket, the nourishing porridge, the hidden cake, all were abruptly withdrawn. No explanation was given. The instructions from Catherine's gentle heart vanished under the new regime's steely order. Once again, the girl found herself plunged back into the darkness of neglect. The rare moment of recognition and care was snatched away with clinical precision, as ruthlessly as a blossom picked too early. In the days that followed, the girl navigated the palace corridors without so much as a nod from the servants. The echoes of Catherine's soft fan and Mary's quiet gift became distant memories, like half-remembered dreams. Yet, for a brief, fragile moment, she had known the balm of kindness enough to remind her that she was not entirely invisible, that her existence, however unwanted, had stirred compassion in at least two hearts. Back in the hidden council rooms, the discussions grew more urgent. Some nobles fretted over potential rumours. Others worried that public sympathy might swing in her favour, forcing the crown's hand. They debated sending her to a distant estate, under the care of a minor noble who would keep her out of sight. They spoke of silken draperies and remote towers, of quiet gardens and locked gates. All the while, the girl herself remained unaware of these deliberations, her world confined to the icy stillness of palace life and the faint whisper of her own heartbeat. Without the blanket's warmth, she huddled in drafty corridors, the cold stones pressing against her thin cloak. Without the porridge, Her meals returned to stale bread and tepid broth. And without the cake, she learned once more to swallow her hopes, along with her tears. Her small, trusting smile folding into memory. In the golden glow of the throne room, the courtiers resumed their formalities. Henry VIII presided over matters of state, his grand gestures and booming voice filling the cavernous space. Meanwhile, the girl drifted along the edges of his power ever present, yet never acknowledged. Her humiliation, once punctuated by Catherine's and Mary's secret gentleness, fell back to a persistent ache of solitude. Still, in her quiet mind, she clung to the memory of that single evening, the softness of the blanket, the warmth of the porridge, the sweetness of the stolen cake. Like a moth drawn to a flicker of light, she held fast to those moments of grace amid the court's relentless cruelty. They became the fragile embers that sustained her through each long, lonely night in the vast Tudor palace. Thus, the palace resumed its ceaseless rhythms, councils plotting concealment, nobles whispering in candlelit rooms, servants scurrying about their duties, while the girl endured, ever on the periphery of power. Yet beneath the hushed plotting and the glittering pageantry, you sense that kindness, once offered, can never be entirely undone, even when the world turns its back. The memory of compassion remains, flickering softly in the dark. Daily life for the girl grew steadily harsher. The court physicians, men in impeccably starched linen and scented with pungent herbal salves, made regular rounds to examine her. With solemn faces, they drew vials of dark blood from her thin arms. Muttering about her supposed excess of black humours, they forced upon her a bitter concoction that stained her lips, a rusty crimson, insisting it would purge the foulness within. Then came the leeching bayonet-sharp lancets pressed to her flesh, blood oozing until even her faint pulse seemed to still. Each procedure left her hollowed, bone-thin, cheeks sunken, and lips pale as aged parchment. The treatments did nothing to heal. They only deepened her fatigue. Turning, her breath ragged, and her shoulders ever more stooped. As if that cruelty were not enough, the court summoned a rural wise woman, her knapsack heavy with talismans and amulets. She wore a curious cap fashioned from eggshells, said to calm the evil winds. In a hush of incense and spirits, she chanted in a tongue only half remembered, sprinkling powders that smelled of smouldering frankincense and raw alcohol. The girl closed her eyes against these arcane rituals, trying to endure the swirl of whispered incantations and pungent fumes that made the chamber spin. To the court spectators, this spectacle was merely a silent performance, strange, exotic, and entirely removed from pity. Yet amid this parade of meaningless trials, the girl clung to a fragment of dignity. When the physicians next insisted she swallow another draught of purgative vinegar, she refused. She set the cup down with a quiet defiance, lips trembling as she spoke her single word. No. The chamber froze. Those who had treated her as a living exhibit now fretted that her silent protest might lead to her collapse or worse. Her death. Whispers rose. If she dies here, the crown will be shamed. In a flurry of panic, the courtiers abandoned their petty cruelty long enough to devise a new plan, whisk her away to a lonely riverside manor, far from the prying eyes of the court, where she might languish unobserved. When she arrived at the new estate, the pace of life slowed to match her own fragile rhythm. Dawn's pale light filtered through the willow branches, casting gentle patterns on the dew-sprinkled grass. Birds sang overhead, their carefree melodies echoing across the wide fields. For the first time in months, the girl felt the world awaken around her and within her. She spent mornings tracing the delicate veins of leaves, marveling at the subtle shifts of green and gold. In a small alcove, she opened a tattered hymn book and murmured the old verses, letting their sacred cadences soothe her heartbeat. In solitude, she spoke softly to herself, small affirmations whispered against the endless hush. These moments of quiet reflection rekindled a sense of personhood she had nearly forgotten. She remembered how her own name felt when spoken with kindness, how her shoulders once eased when unburdened by swords and torches. Here, alone with sunlight and song, she rediscovered the gentle rhythm of her own breath. The river's gentle murmur lulled her to rest each afternoon, lulling away the sounds of lancets and chants. The manor's few servants, hardened women who tended the hearth and fowl, regarded her with distant curiosity rather than disdain. They brought her bowls of simple fair porridge, sweetened with honey, bread still warm from the oven. They offered no heavy blankets of courtly politeness. But their ordinary kindness was enough to remind her that not all human hearts were cold. In those long, unbroken days, the court's endless intrigues felt like a distant dream. She no longer existed as a case study or a cautionary token. Instead, she was a solitary creature of breath and flesh, learning once more to tend her own spirit. Each soft breeze that stirred the curtain, each distant toll of a bell, invited her to remember the quiet power of living. And so, amid the gentle hum of river and field, the girl wrote short verses in the margins of her hymn book, recording the colour of dawn, the taste of fresh milk, the touch of grass beneath her bare feet. These humble entries became her new rites, rituals of remembrance to affirm that she was not a curiosity, but a soul enlivened by earth and sky, though the court's strange experiments and whispered plots still lingered at the edges of her mind. Here she found herself beyond their grasp. Far from the clang of armour and the hush of conspirators, she reclaimed the simple, unhurried cadence of her own life. And in that reclamation, she discovered that solace woven from river mist and leaf song could restore even the most battered spirit to something resembling peace. Even far from the bright torches of the court, she could not escape the long shadow of prejudice. Rumours of the remote riverside manor drifted back to the palace like drifting smoke. She is hidden there so as not to shame the king. Some whispered in velvet-draped chambers. It is said that, whenever she appears before the children of the household, they flee in terror and tears. Whenever a visiting envoy arrived, the girl would be summoned to stand in the courtyard before the great gates, displayed as evidence of royal mercy or, perhaps, royal indifference. The very first time she dared to resist, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Guard and steward alike paused, eyes widening as she straightened her back and refused to bow her head. Silence fell upon the manor grounds, broken only by the gentle lap of water against the banks. No one had ever seen her stand with such resolve. In that quiet moment, a faint spark of courage glimmered in her chest, a fragile ember against a backdrop of unending darkness. She was no longer merely a living exhibit of misfortune. She became a person with agency, however delicate. Unwilling to yield entirely, in the days that followed, she remained physically confined within the manor's austere walls. But mentally she roamed more freely than before. Each morning she rose with the pale dawn light filtering through narrow window panes, and she took to recording the smallest wonders of her surroundings. She noted the pale pink blossom that drifted across the threshold, the resonant call of a lone cicada at dusk, the rough-hewn blanket that a kind servant had stitched in a hurry for her thin shoulders. These journal entries became her most precious possessions, tiny testaments to her own perspective in a world that sought to silence her voice, even amid the persistent hush of isolation. The moments of simple joy still found their way to her. Once, a folded parchment arrived by secret hand, its edges marked with Catherine's elegant script. It contained only 2 short lines, blessings for her peace, and the promise of quiet prayers offered nightly in candlelight. The girl pressed the letter to her heart and allowed herself the briefest, most radiant smile. Another afternoon, while secluded in the east wing, she heard the distant strains of a piano drifting through the corridors. The melody, soft and melancholy, reminded her of lullabies learned in childhood. and for a fleeting instant, she felt the warmth of nostalgia curl around her mind like a gentle breeze. She clung to these rare gifts as one might cling to life rafts in a merciless sea. Each secret letter and each borrowed note of music became supplies on her arduous journey through loneliness. In the pages of her journal, she wrote of them as though they were drops of honey sweet, sustaining, precious, beyond measure. And each evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, she stood on a narrow stone terrace overlooking the slow-moving river. The horizon burned in shades of crimson and gold, the last light of day pooling on the water's surface. She watched in silent reverence, feeling the dull ache in her chest ease just enough to breathe. In those quiet moments, she understood that she was not wholly alone, that even the vast sky could soothe her. Even the fading light could promise another dawn, though her solitude stretched on like a long, somber thread. Those small comforts wove a tapestry of hope within her weary heart. She realized that dignity could be reclaimed, one small stitch at a time, in the act of defiantly raising her head, in the preservation of her own stories, in the acceptance of these tiny acts of kindness. This marked the beginning of a new path, one that would lead her gradually back toward her own humanity. Thus, she moved forward, step by delicate step, armed with the quiet power of her own words and the gentle glow of hope that, once kindled, could never be fully extinguished. After that fleeting moment of hope, the Tudor court resumed its ceaseless dance of shifting alliances and rivalries. One faction waned while another rose. Ministers were dismissed, favorites promoted, and purveyors of rumour slipped in and out of favour. Though she remained in her secluded riverside manor, the girl found herself treated like a pawn in a grand chess game. Every time a new steward took charge, each appointed at the king's whim, she endured fresh examinations. First, a brisk assessment of her appearance. Does her cloak hang neatly? Are her eyes clear? Then, a hushed debate among the visiting clerks. Should she be concealed deeper within the palace, or brought out to display the crown's supposed charity? She quickly learned that these small mercies were nothing more than illusions. The moment her secret patron departed, any favours evaporated like morning mist, as if the political tides alone were not enough to unsettle her. The kingdom's religious identity swayed wildly. It shifted from Catholicism to Protestantism under Henry's reign, then back to Catholicism under Mary, and once more to Protestantism under Elizabeth. With each liturgical turn, the girl's existence was reinterpreted. Under one regime, she was deemed a dire portent of divine anger. Under the next, a tormented soul in need of spiritual redemption. Some clerics claimed she was God's punishment for the court's pride, while others insisted she was a test of the faithful. No matter which doctrine held sway, she remained the focal point of metaphysical politicking. Whispers of the hand of God or a curse upon the throne left her spirit, bruised each new sermon, a fresh wound on her already tender heart. In response to this relentless glare, she cultivated a new form of self-preservation. She learned to shrink into herself, to modulate every gesture and breath, until she seemed little more than a fading shadow. When walking through the cloisters, she made each step so hesitant, so cautious, that her passage was barely audible. She never met anyone's gaze, for more than an instant, eyes downcast. Posture unobtrusive. These small acts of invisibility became her armour against the gaze of both lord and priest. Within the manor's gardens, she was set to the humble labour of tending a few rows of cabbage and kale. At first, this felt punitive, a punishment for her very being. Yet, as days passed, she discovered a measure of solace in the soil. Aged on, she crept out to the beds beneath the morning light, watering each plant with trembling hands and marvelling at the glistening dew on wide leaves. The earth's cool touch against her fingertips grounded her, reassured her that life could still be nurtured. In the late afternoon, she sat beside a narrow window, listening to the wind among the willows, letting the quietude settle around her like a soft mantle. Though her tasks were simple, her mind remained hungry. In the dim corner of her modest chamber sat a small collection of books, mostly prayer books, and a few old histories that Catherine had smuggled to her. She pored over each page, tracing the elegant script, absorbing the stories of distant lands and saints who had endured suffering. These texts became her lifeline, connecting her to a world beyond the stone walls. She began her own practice of journaling, scribbling in crude, uneven letters, her reflections on hope and humanity. In her journal, she wrote of her longing to be seen not as a spectacle, but as a person worthy of dignity and acknowledgement. Yet, no matter how diligently she worked to cultivate her inner life, the outside world's currents would not be so easily stilled. At unpredictable intervals, an official retinue arrived to inspect the estate. In the echoing corridors, she would be summoned, never welcome to pass before the new dignitaries. They would whisper among themselves as she stood silent, "She is not for public display," or "Let us demonstrate our compassion." Then she would be quietly dismissed, led into some dusty storage room among crates of ancient tapestries. There, in the dim half-light, she would catch her reflection, a lone figure etched against the cold stone, her shadow stretching and fading like her own sense of self. Each time, she forced a polite, pale smile and offered only the slightest bow, her heart aching at her fate as a neutral object, her existence acknowledged but never embraced. She felt the full weight of her nonentity, present yet unseen, catalogued but never truly known. And so she persisted. Day by day, she tended her plants, devoured her smuggled manuscripts, and chronicled her thoughts in that battered journal. In those pages, she preserved the fragments of her identity, each word a defiant claim to humanity. And though the stone halls of the court and the shifting whims of religion threatened to drown her spirit, she held fast to her small, unwavering truth that even the faintest voice, once recorded, can never completely be erased. 5 years passed, and the girl grew older, her slight frame blending almost seamlessly into the quiet architecture of the manor, a forgotten corner seldom glanced upon. The chance of being discovered dwindled over time, yet each encounter left another scar upon her spirit. Her body became nothing more than thin bone and delicate skin stretched taut, her eyes often half closed, heavy with weariness, but still flickering with an inner resolve. She no longer wept herself to sleep as she once did. Instead, she channeled her emotions into the tender cultivation of fragrant flowers and hardy vegetables, her rare moments of genuine pleasure. Among all her blooms, the pure white petals held a special magic. They unfurled each evening in the dying light, exhaling a cool, subtle sweetness that would stir even a passing traveller's attention. In a world that had spurned her, these blossoms were the sole gift she offered to her own battered heart rather than to the indifferent court. Season by season, she catalogued each plant's traits in a tattered notebook, creating a precious botanical record that, unbeknownst to her, rivaled any compendium prized by the royal herbalists, though they never deigned to acknowledge her work. Occasionally, a kindly chaplain arrived from the chapel, carrying simple meals left over from the day's communion. He spoke gentle words, "Continue to pray in silent gratitude," or, "When your spirit grows weary, let the Lord's mercy embrace you." She received these consolations as sacred offerings, weaving them into an inner revelation that helped her accept her place as the court's unspoken secret, while finding a quiet peace in unwavering faith. Yet the court never truly forgot this living case. Each major festival demanded an accounting of unregistered visitors within the royal estate, and she was duly listed once more under the heading Uninvited Guest. Protocol dictated her temporary transfer to another, more remote manor, each relocation a faceless eviction. No thanks were offered, no excuses given. Over time, she mastered the art of packing her few belongings in a rough linen sack, preparing herself mentally for each episode of internal exile. In these lonely moves, She found an unexpected kinship with the estate's lowest servants, the ploughmen whose backs bent under ox carts, the footmen who carried pots of soup. The prisoners shifted from one dungeon to another. Though their circumstances varied, they shared the same quiet invisibility. In the stolen moments of communal hardship, she tasted solidarity, a nod of recognition, the brief warmth of a shared bowl of gruel, a whispered greeting in the corridor. Such small gestures shone like hidden lanterns in the darkness. Over time, the fearful memories of candlelit halls, the soft click of fans, the murmurs of disgust became echoes, scattered by the fresh chorus of dawn. The distant trill of a shepherd's flute or the morning bird songs along the riverbank gradually replaced the oppressive hush of courtly cruelty. By the water's edge, she learned to measure her own worth, not by the privileged's glances, but by the rhythm of her own breathing, the gentle rise and fall, the freedom to inhale hope, the stillness of silent existence. There, in the drowsy haze of each new dawn, she felt her spirit awaken again. The winds sigh through the willows, the shimmer of sun on rippling water, the soft rustle of her notebook pages all whispered assurances that she was more than a shadow. She belonged not to a cruel spectacle, but to the simple, enduring pulse of life itself. In this final, hushed season of her days, she stood apart from the shifting tides of politics and religion that had once tossed her like driftwood, no longer a pawn in royal intrigue, no longer a portent or a lesson. She was a solitary gardener and chronicler of beauty, a keeper of quiet faith. Her blooms, her prayers, her journals, they were her testament, and as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, painting the sky in soft gold and rose, she whispered to the river, "I am here. I breathe. I remain." In that gentle acknowledgement of her own being, she found the truest liberty of all, a soft, enduring peace, born from the soft murmur of her own heart. As the years slipped by like soft shadows at dusk, the girl gradually wove herself into the fabric of local law. Villagers spoke in hushed tones of the strange flower grower, a silent woman who never uttered a greeting yet coaxed entire gardens into bloom. No one spoke of her face, or the deformity that had once made her an object of scorn. Instead, they marveled at her magic touch, how wild grasses and weeds were transformed by her hands into a paradisiacal haven. In their stories, she became less a curiosity and more a living testament to the ordinary miracles of the natural world. Free at last from the harsh spotlight of the ruined court, she seized this chance to document the region's flora. By lamplight in her modest cottage, she sketched delicate pages of a handmade notebook, each page illustrating a medicinal herb or healing leaf. She labelled them meticulously: the spear-shaped leaf of ribwort plantain for soothing skin, the pale petals of chrysanthemum for easing headaches, the crushed blossoms of elderflower for calming fevers. Before long, villagers began to pass her journal from hand to hand, calling it Madame's plant book. Though the courts never acknowledged her work, for the local folk, tired farmers, and infirm elders, this guide became a lifeline. Yet in the quiet hours of deep rain, she still returned to her old diary, the faded, fragile record of her days under Tudor cruelty. She would open it to the earliest pages, read the cramped lines that recounted cold corridors, gaudy tapestries, and hushed jeers. Her eyes would mist over the ink as tears blurred the words, not from bitterness, but from remembering how far she had travelled. These recollections were her fire, kept alive, so she would not forget what she had endured, or the strength it took to endure it. In the waning glow of her life, she no longer dreamed of recognition from the pompous courts. Instead, her heart yearned for a simpler peace, a humble thatched cottage surrounded by her gardens. Dawn birdsong greeting her each morning. When she awoke to the first faint light, she whispered thanks to the sky for her breath. At day's end, she gazed westward, where the sun slanted in blazing hues. grateful simply for the gift of sight, knowing her own time was drawing near. She chose one young woman as her successor, a girl with a similar deformity, hidden away like a forgotten secret. To her she bequeathed the plant book, teaching her how to feel the breeze in each leaf and hear the pulse of life beneath her fingertips. This was her final legacy, not a noble title, not a grand ceremony, but the quiet miracle of sharing knowledge and compassion. And so, in a world that once saw only her suffering, she became its gentle healer. The gardens she tended flourished in her absence, seeds of mercy, planted in every furrow. The villagers remembered her not as an oddity, but as a kind soul whose greatest power was her willingness to nurture beneath the silent boughs of apple trees. They spoke her name with reverent smiles, carrying forward the legacy of a woman who had claimed her dignity by becoming the guardian of life itself. When at last her breath stilled, they laid her gently to rest beneath the beloved magnolia tree at the far edge of her garden. There was no ornate monument to catch the eye, no marble tablet inscribed with flowing verse. Instead, a simple wooden plank marked her resting place, bearing only the words, "Madam of the Flowers, Sower of Life." Villagers came in quiet procession, heads bowed, laying wild bouquets of daisies and buttercups upon her grave. No loud lamentations, only soft tears and whispered gratitude. She gave us more than the court ever offered. Word of her understated funeral spread like a gentle current through the hamlet. Among those who recalled the tales of the court oddity, astonishment replaced old judgments. Could the same girl who once frightened noble children now inspire such reverence? They spoke no longer of her appearance, but of her steadfast courage and the blossoms she nurtured. Her life story transformed into local legend, a powerful emblem transcending all prejudice. Meanwhile, at the distant seat of power, the royal archives held but a scant record. A minor noble child of deformity, entrusted to the gardener. No further mention followed. Across successiverings, the court's intrigues and edicts onward rolled, indifferent to her memory. Like so many court casualties, she faded from official history, a double betrayal of both body and legacy. Yet her essence endured in the oral tapestry woven by common folk. Around hearth fires, parents told of her resilience, not as a freak of Tudor law, but as a living testament to patience and compassion. They reminded children that even when the world turned a cold shoulder, one could still plant seeds of kindness, watch them sprout, and find beauty amid life's storms. Today, travelers who discover her long-forgotten garden pause at the leaning magnolia by the stream. In warm seasons, its creamy blossoms unfurl in silent praise, a lingering echo of her gentle spirit. Passers-by kneel to trace the petals, feeling the cool, soft texture beneath their fingertips. The white blooms, pristine against the green, stand as an unspoken homage to her life, pure, unyielding, and full of quiet grace. Those who wander its winding paths often sense a soft presence, as though the girl herself guides their steps. Some swear they hear the distant hum of a hymn carried on the breeze, or catch the faintest rustle as if hands, long gentle intending, still caress the leaves. In that hush, they find a peculiar comfort, the knowledge that compassion, once sown, does not perish. The wooden marker remains, weathered but upright, its simple inscription more eloquent than any royal decree. Beneath it, earth and root, flower and leaf, continue the cycle she so tenderly cultivated, and in every petal that drifts to the water's edge, there lies her final, enduring message that life's truest legacy is not power or station, but the gentle art of nurturing hope in barren soil. Her truest legacy, the villagers soon realized, was not written in elaborate royal edicts or lofty academic tomes, but woven into the hearts of humble folk across the fields. She left behind a simple creed: life is more precious than any prejudice, and genuine compassion transcends the bounds of flesh and bone. Through her teachings of local herbs unassuming yet potent, she proved that true power lies not upon the throne, but in a heart that knows how to share. In time, the official chroniclers grew wise enough to record the deeds of those once overlooked. Inspired by her example, villagers established community herb gardens, where anyone in need might gather a remedy for cough or fever. In the old schoolhouse, classes formed to teach children with disabilities, ensuring they would never again languish in silence. A small charity fund emerged to support the elderly and orphaned, each grant carrying her whisper, "Nurture one another." For every life bears value. In every seedbed of these new endeavours, one could sense her spirit, tending inexplicably to each tender shoot of hope. Her story, that of the cast-aside girl who rose to sow life amid adversity, blossomed across the arts. Painters captured her in oil on canvas, in works such as The Flower Planter Amid the Storm, depicting a solitary figure beneath grey skies. Petals bursting in defiance. Poets composed collections like Ode to the Invisible, verses weaving together sorrow and solace, celebrating the unsung heroine's gentle heart. Even in the theatre, playwrights staged intimate dramas, exploring her loneliness and boundless mercy. A play titled Petals in the Shadows ran for weeks in the county hall. Through these creative lenses, her tale transcended its Tudor setting, touching audiences as far away as distant continents. Modern historians, too, turned their gaze toward her fragmented legacy. With painstaking care, they pieced together her identity from scant court records. Those single line referencing a child of deformity placed under a gardener's care and oral traditions preserved in parish engravings. Scholars of social history and psychology studied her life as a case study in prejudice and empathy. Gender studies seminars debated how her very difference revealed the arbitrary cruelty of rigid norms. The phrase, "monster girl of the Tudor court," once a slur, was repurposed in footnotes and journal articles as a call to reconsider the boundaries of normalcy. Translations of her story multiplied, each language a new voice affirming her humanity. At last, she ceased to be merely that oddity of a bygone royal household. She emerged fully as a person hungry for life, desperate to be seen, yearning for acknowledgement. By her example, she taught us an undying lesson. The deepest wounds are not those inflicted upon the flesh, but those carved into the soul by abandonment. Yet the faintest spark of compassion can ignite hope, even in the harshest darkness. In our own time, her whisper endures. Remember the power of a single act of kindness, the worth of every living being, and the boundless reach of empathy. Her life reminds us that when a world turns its back, we need only extend our hand to cultivate new blooms of mercy, and in doing so, transform the very soil of history. And while the echo of compassion still resonates in our memories, another chapter of history softly unfolds among the splendid stones and shadowy passageways. Let us step back in time to Venice in the 11th century, where a Byzantine princess named Theodora Duchina Salvo has just arrived. Assuming the role of wife to Doge Domenico Salvo, she brought with her the full splendor of civilization from the capital of Constantinople, and little did she know, she would become the focal point of one of the most chilling mysteries ever to unfold within a royal court. Imagine yourself standing there, in the year 1075, Venice radiant yet filled with unease. A place where power and dread are colliding fiercely. The shimmering candlelight reflects on the polished marble floor, but that glow is nowhere near strong enough to dispel the overwhelming stench invading the space. The most powerful noblesmen, long accustomed to facing war and intrigue, now cower, covering their faces with silk handkerchiefs, desperately trying to avoid the waves of deathly odour drifting from the royal chamber. There, Princess Theodora Duchina Salvo, a living symbol of Byzantine civilization, is enduring her final hours in a terrifying state of decline. There are no more festive songs, no more courteous greetings. Every breath is thick with the scent of sickness, dampness, and fear. The servants, who once scurried back and forth to serve, now only dare to quietly leave food at the door, slipping away as if afraid to touch a ghost. The doctors, once famed throughout Venice for their healing skills, now only dare to prescribe from afar, handing their remedies to others, none daring to step inside the princess's room. That slow, bizarre death was unlike any epidemic Venice had ever faced. People whispered, was this an Eastern curse, a judgment from God upon luxury? Yet all explanations faded into insignificance before the horrifying reality. Theodora's body, while she was still conscious, began to decay piece by piece. Her skin turned ashen. A foul stench poured forth endlessly, so strong it spread into the grand hall, creeping through corridors and frightening anyone bold enough to linger. This appalling event quickly became a nightmare for both the palace and the city of Venice. It is said that even Doge Domenico Salvo, a man of iron in both trade and politics, could not endure the deathly odour rising every time he visited his wife. Curtains of silk and velvet, once symbols of splendour, were now used to try to block the smell. But all were futile. Huge incense burners, filled with the most precious resins, could not overpower the brutal truth taking place. In the days that followed, every hallway in the palace seemed frozen with fear. No more public meetings, no more cheerful banquets, only haunted whispers about a princess bearing the rotting disease. A mystery no one dared to solve. And you, standing amidst that thick, suffocating atmosphere, are about to step deeper into the story, a place where the boundaries between civilization, pride, and fear grow strangely thin. The Byzantine princess did not merely bring with her radiant beauty and dazzling jewels, she embodied the brilliance of an entire Eastern civilization. In those days, Constantinople was famed for running water in every palace, golden domes, and magnificent halls. From childhood, Theodora had grown up surrounded by colourful murals, music, perfumes, and refined bathing rituals, a world entirely unlike muddy Venice, where every street reeked of seaweed, rotting fish, garbage, and bodies that had never known soap. On her very first day at the Venetian court, Theodora stunned the entire grand hall when she calmly drew from her sleeve a small, ornately decorated golden fork with 2 prongs, shining brightly like the sun. For the people of Constantinople, this was simply an ordinary eating utensil, but for the Venetian nobility, that fork was nothing short of an unfamiliar diabolical object. A wave of murmurs swept through, eyes wide with shock, and whispers ran the length of the banquet table. God gave us hands. Why use this devil's metal? Some even compared the fork to the trident of demons in church paintings. Dressed in a purple silk gown embroidered with gold, Theodora gracefully savoured each piece of bread and each grape, every movement refined as though she were performing art. Her jade necklace, golden bracelets, and gemstone rings glittered beneath the hundreds of candles. Yet the more beautiful she appeared, the more she was ostracized. The fork quickly became a symbol of wastefulness, exotic luxury, and even a divine threat to the simple social order of Venice. But the innovations did not end at the dining table. Theodora also maintained a series of elaborate bathing rituals. She instructed her servants to collect fresh rainwater, boil it, infuse it with aromatics, and only then would she let it touch her skin. Her private chambers always wafted with the scent of incense. Rolls of fragrant fabric were freshly laundered, and her clothes were always pressed and steeped in rich aromas. Venetians at the time, who used only small bouquets of flowers, nosegays, or fragrant herbs to mask bodily odours, simply could not comprehend how frequent bathing or lingering perfumes could be considered the mark of civilization. At first, these customs simply made Theodora the object of curiosity, wariness, and then judgment. But no one could have foreseen that these seemingly elegant habits would foreshadow disaster when, one day, a strange and terrible stench would truly engulf the entire Doge's palace, spreading a horror that neither Theodora nor anyone else could have ever anticipated. In those first days, there was only a silent, creeping exhaustion in Theodora's every movement. She washed hurriedly now. Her elaborate rituals shortened, her dresses no longer perfectly pressed and arranged as when she first arrived in Venice. The servants whispered among themselves, "Perhaps the food is strange to her taste, or maybe the Venetian climate does not suit her." Some blamed the palace's drainage system, old and easily prone to unpleasant smells. But no one foresaw that, from the cracks of the princess's chamber door, dense, nauseating fumes would begin to seep out. At first, people thought it was just the smell of the kitchen or spoiled food. But as time passed, the odor grew heavier, flooding the corridors so strong that even those accustomed to the stench of rotten fish and refuse wrinkled their noses and covered their faces with handkerchiefs. The Doge doctors, regarded as magicians in those days, tried every method they could imagine: bloodletting, decoctions made from precious herbs, prayers before the altar of St. Mark. Yet, all efforts were in vain. The stench spread further and further, as if an inexhaustible poison was slowly decomposing the princess's body from within. The medical experts from Constantinople, where Eastern medicine was considered the most advanced, were equally powerless. They could only shake their heads and record strange symptoms. Theodora's skin turned an ashen grey. Patches of sores appeared. Wounds would not heal, and the foul smell seeped into every piece of clothing, every blanket, every item she touched. Nothing could be cleansed. The objects from her room were all burned afterward, but the smell would not fade, clinging on like a relentless curse. Meanwhile, within the palace, the atmosphere grew increasingly suffocating and cold. The once busy servants now only dared to tiptoe, quickly leaving food at her door before hurrying away, avoiding eye contact, avoiding even the slightest noise. No one dared to offer comfort or ask after the princess anymore, as if even a single word might spread something terrifying. This bizarre incident quickly upended all order in the Doge Palace. Council meetings were postponed indefinitely. Merchants kept their distance. Diplomatic affairs were left unattended. The festive, lively air disappeared. In its place came anxious whispers. Has the Byzantine bride brought some strange illness to Venice? These rumours only deepened the palace's fear, pushing Venice into an unprecedented diplomatic crisis caught between the boundaries of civilization and superstition, between fear of disease and the pride of an emerging power. In the Middle Ages, the medicine of Venice, as well as all of Western Europe, was utterly ignorant of bacteria, viruses, or any modern concept of hygiene. For them, every cause of illness could be traced back to the four corrupt humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Physicians, considered the wisest minds in the court, relentlessly employed bloodletting with needles, prescribed decoctions dyed a coppery red, or applied herbal poultices to wounds. Yet all of these only made Theodora's suffering, weakness, and despair grow worse. Fierce debates erupted among the doctors. Could it be from bathing too often, one suspected? Another argued, maybe it's the strange foods brought from Byzantium. Then some simply concluded, this is fate, a punishment from God for those who live in excessive luxury and pride. When medicine failed, the palace turned to priests, magicians, and even country-wise women. They brought amulets, wore hats made of eggshells, believing these would ward off evil spirits. Each night, exorcism rituals were held outside the princess's chamber. Some murmured incantations. Others burned incense, so the smoke drifted through the halls, all hoping the scents could mask the horror radiating from that room. But the more rituals performed, the more the foul stench spread. clinging stubbornly to every brick and every silk curtain. All of Venice began to whisper rumours, from fishermen at sea to busy merchants. Everyone passed on the word, Venice's palace is now a den of demons and plague. Across the islands, the people avoided venturing anywhere near the Doge's palace. Shipments of goods to the city dwindled, for fear of the strange disease. Lavish feasts and public council sessions were postponed indefinitely. The entire island was suffocated by an atmosphere of stifling cold and fear. The few records that survive describe a chilling scene. Doctors gave the illness the provisional name Tudorosis, a disease no one dared to confirm or had ever seen before. Survivors later recalled the princess's room was nothing but a deep, cold, and dark tomb. Candlelight flickered on stone walls. Incense smoke floated thick in the air. Some even said that not even demons dared set foot inside that room. The story of Theodora's rotting disease quickly spread beyond the palace walls, becoming a collective nightmare. It crept into mothers' lullabies, children's dreams, and the persistent fears that haunted Venice for centuries after. The city had never witnessed an event as surreal, as tragic, and as chilling as this. When Theodora drew her last breath, the tragedy did not end there. The stench of decay clung stubbornly to every wall, velvet carpet, and stone corridor of the palace. Impossible to dispel. No one dared to hold a grand funeral. The princess's body was tightly wrapped in cloth, soaked with quicklime right in her sealed chamber, then hurriedly buried in a cemetery far from the city. Avoiding all traditional religious rites, the servants used lime to seal every doorframe, window, and vent around the room that had once been her quarters, hoping the scent of death would not spread any further. After this calamity, the name of Doge Domenico Selvo, once famed as a decisive leader, gradually faded into obscurity. The event severely damaged the reputation of the Venetian court, not only in the eyes of its people, but also among other European courts. No one wanted to mention those dark days anymore. Official records and chronicles also avoided detailing the rotting disease affair. Yet the legend of the rotting princess spread quickly across Europe, from small taverns in Italy to the bustling cities of the north. Everyone retold this story as a chilling warning about the fear and rejection of anything different, about the utter helplessness of medieval medicine when faced with the unknown, and about the terrifying fragility of royal power. Some whispered that after Theodora's death, Venice fell into a long period of misfortune, trade declined, and the court repeatedly encountered trouble, even after hundreds of years. The gloom of the Doge's palace still lingers in the memory of Venetians. The elders tell their grandchildren stories of the ghost princess, the woman who sowed terror with nothing more than a foul odour no one could explain. The tale became legend, a lesson for later generations sometimes. A single stench can bring an entire court to its knees, rendering all power and ceremony meaningless before the reality of frail bodies and the limits of humanity. And when the last candle on the cold stone hallway flickers out, Venice returns once more to its quiet waves and morning mist. But somewhere, in the old winding alleys of the city, the memory of Princess Theodora still returns now and then in the moonlight, like a distant echo of power, fear, and the human heart amid the darkness of history. Perhaps when the doors of history have closed and silent darkness settles over the fates once forgotten within palace walls, we can still hear faint whispers reminding us of compassion, tolerance, and the fragile limits of power and knowledge. The two bedtime stories we've just traversed on one side, the deformed Tudor princess, exiled and forgotten amid the false glow of the royal court, and on the other, Theodora Duchina Salvo, the Byzantine bride who brought with her a radiant culture, but whose end became a horrifying stench that brought Venice to its knees, may seem distant, even fairy tale-like. Yet they resonate deeply with lessons for each of us in the modern age. First of all, there is the lesson about fear and prejudice toward what is different. Beneath the golden candlelight, whether in the cold Tudor palace or the grand Venetian hall, people have always found it easy to turn fear into walls, isolating those who do not fit the mold. The Tudor princess, simply for a congenital deformity, simply for not perfectly fitting into the court's strict rituals, became the object of coldness, cruelty, and morbid curiosity. Theodora with the civilized, refined habits of Byzantium. Her golden fork, her fragrant baths became a strange object, a divine threat in the eyes of the masses. And when her body decayed, all values, all splendor were swept away by a primal obsession, the fear of the strange, the uncontrollable. But has our own era truly changed? Somewhere in today's world, those who are different in appearance, culture, circumstance, or health still face ridicule, stigma, labels, and exclusion from society. Worse still, in the age of social media, the invisible stench of rumor, insult, or cold indifference can spread even more rapidly and fiercely than the poisonous winds of the past. That is why these old stories always retain their value as warnings to look inward, to learn to accept, understand, and cherish difference, even when it is unfamiliar, or sometimes even uncomfortable to the majority. Secondly, these stories are vivid evidence of the helpless limits of knowledge, power, and even entire systems medicine. Government, when confronted by the unknown, physicians, priests, nobles, once so proud of their authority and wisdom, could only watch as tragedy unfolded before Theodora's mysterious illness or the silent pain of the Tudor princess. They cited every explanation: divine punishment, fate, foreign customs, but could neither heal nor save. The arrogance and self-satisfaction of a civilization walled up within its traditions only thickened the barriers, leaving victims like these two princesses lonelier than ever. And in our own times, though we have medicine, machines, and modern theories, we cannot deny humanity still faces the limits of perception, of understanding our bodies, minds, and communities. There are still diseases without clear causes, invisible psychological wounds, and those unseen stenches of prejudice and stigma seeping through every home, office, classroom, and street. We must learn humility. Accept that our strength is not always enough to control or heal everything, and thus cherish all the more the compassion and empathy we can offer those enduring their own tragedies. Finally, the greatest message these two stories leave us is the power of kindness, of small but persistent acts. Perhaps history remembers Theodora only as the rotting princess, remembers the Tudor princess only as a forgotten oddity, but in that darkness, there were still those who quietly left a bowl of porridge by the door, sent a prayerful letter, or offered a white flower. That silent decency, though forgotten in the official histories, was the only light that dispelled the gloom. We, though we cannot change the past, can shape the present and future through our own empathy, tolerance, and humanity for all fragile, different souls around us. And that is the unchanging value of tonight's bedtime tales. Not just soothing lullabies to ease us into sleep, but reminders that, when we awaken, we may choose to live better, love more, and cherish what is simple, small, different, and yes, even those invisible wounds borne by those beside us.